My guest today is Amánda Argot Eftimio. Amánda is a psychedelic wellness advocate, speaker, writer, and facilitator. She founded INTEGRA to support retreat centers, wellness and hospitality, and professional facilitators in designing integration programs that help people find meaning and healing from their experiences with altered states of consciousness. She bridges traditional wisdom with contemporary practices through her experiences in the nonprofit sector, previously at El Puente Foundation, which facilitates forest regeneration and bioculture preservation of indigenous medicines in the Amazon basin. She received her Master of Science in Neuroscience and Psychology of Mental Health, where she focused on the integrative effects of plant-based medicines with psychotherapy for mental health outcomes. In this episode, we talk about principles behind a successful integration, techniques facilitators can use to support integration, and how Amánda supports experienced organizers. I'm interested in what made you focus or what led you to focus on integration specifically instead of maybe the experience as a whole. Why that interest?
Yeah, so what really drew me to integration is because I was seeing around me and also with my own personal experience what was happening when we were engaging in these transformative experiences, psychedelic or otherwise. We were working and I saw my friends, my community in these altered states. And then I noticed what would happen when we came back down, so to speak, into our everyday, that there was lack of support there, whether it be physical environment or people who knew how to support during that time. The right lifestyle changes and considerations that needed to be made we weren't aware of these things. And it really affected how we navigated through time and place in those moments. And I myself was struggling. I was like, what am I doing? I had these sort of existential crisis. I wasn't feeling fully complete being back into my normal reality. I wasn't sure how to talk about it with my loved ones and my friends and family. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing or even how I was feeling, if it was correct or if there was something wrong with me. And I realized that also the people around me were feeling the same way. And so I said, okay, what is it then? If we're working in these transformational containers, we leave them and we're left with what exactly? How is it that we can really make meaning out of this? And that's when I started to look at integration. And I started to research what happens after. What does aftercare look like? What are the different steps and the practices that we need to take in order to feel grounded, first of all, to land after such an extraordinary journey? And then what are the next steps after that? And I noticed that there was no singular answer. There were so many different opinions and perspectives and ways of going about it. And maybe because of that, or maybe because of the lack of education around integration, it wasn't being exposed as part of the process. That's what really drew me into it in the first place, was that personal experience.
And so it's basically that incapacity to operate at that level that you were in the container and the drop. You just go down to past patterns. It's hard because in those containers, you focus so much energy and focus on that particular transformation work. If you spend 10 hours on transformation work and then you spend just 5 minutes the next day, obviously it's going to be different. If it's 100% in the container, how close to that 100% can you get realistically after? And can you actually not drop? Or is it okay to drop because there's no other way?
Yeah, I would say there isn't just a drop, but there is this like, how do I contain the expansion that happened within me? There was this huge big release, this moment of pure awareness and presence and love and freedom and whatever the feelings that come up. And actually, sometimes there isn't a drop. There's this need to keep going and to go further and further. And how do we allow our other container of life, our ordinary container, to keep that extraordinary within us alive? And so to answer your question, if there is a drop at all, not necessarily, although over time, yes, like we do go back to similar ways of being and feeling and relating to the world, because it's years and years of patterns that we have. It's very hard to just break that within a 1 hour, 5 hour, 6 hour experience, or even a few days. But there are ways for us to anchor into that peak moment so that we can remind ourselves to go back to it day in and day out. And that takes practice. And that takes a lot of time and discipline. It's not overnight that once we go back into our reality, just 5 minutes a day of journaling or 5 minutes a day of a meditation isn't really enough to keep us in that state that we hope to be in and to actually make those changes that we're looking to make.
Maybe it's pleasant or very interesting, but maybe it's not you. You're here for a purpose and you're here for a particular identity or a particular way of life, which is interesting because you're feeding the tapestry of life. And maybe you're not meant to be that wholeness all the time. And obviously I would love to be in that state of wholeness all the time. That's something I would want to extend. But is it okay to accept ourselves with the flaws and just be that person with black and white and not just beautiful bliss?
Absolutely. I think we are humans. Humans live with the shadow and light, right? We're made up of the yin and the yang. There's always part of the natural world is seeing light and darkness, it's life and death. We have to be in the state of flow in the ups and the downs in order to reach this sort of homeostasis, right? And even the most enlightened of beings, these spiritual leaders like Jack Kornfield, for example, he wrote in his book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. That's the title of the book. He's somebody who reaches these transcendental meditative states, perhaps on a regular basis. But at the end of the day, he says we can have this ecstasis, but then we have to go and do our laundry and fold our laundry and be part of the mundane, be part of the day-to-day. This is part of being a human. It's not about keeping in this peak experience all the time. We can do our best to elevate it and to keep an expansion in our hearts so we can be open to receiving more and more of it, and to be better at transmitting that to others, because there's also this element of service, right? We're working with these altered states, with these transformational containers, so that we can be in service of others and we can support others in their own journey as well. I think a really big part of that is that reciprocal nature, which is, for me, a very important part of the integration process, incorporating our ability to be in service of other. And of course, to give back to nature and to our environment, whatever environment that might be. But it really is this cyclical, reciprocal pattern that's part of that integration process.
So we're almost onto a principle there of how to integrate after the experience. So one that is coming naturally is the service one. Are there other principles of integration that you've seen help people get the most out of their experience, or just not drop too much?
Yeah, one big one that is often maybe considered an afterthought or not considered, but it's very important and it happens immediately after an experience, and that's around rest and doing nothing. We are so used to, in this culture, in our sort of the Western way of working, is to work and do. And if we're just being, there might be something wrong. Maybe that's laziness. Maybe that's a lack of interest. But with medicines, with altered states, it is important to give ourselves rest and to do nothing in the first day, if we can, after an experience itself, to allow our bodies to integrate. And we're not going straight into the verbal processing. We're not trying to make sense of what's happened. We're not trying to reflect on every single detail and make meaning of it and already create our action plans and call the people we need to call and make the lifestyle changes we need to make. All of that is great and that will come. But what comes first is actually rest and being in that very often rare and precious time of just being. And you'd be surprised how much can come from that point as a starting place. And then we can move on to some of the more practical aspects, the step-by-step integration process that we long for and we're so eager to do with that sort of energy and that fire that we get from these experiences.
Lovely. We spoke about this in the past. There is this difficulty for existing projects. So let's say hospitality or experiences that are already run to go to the next level and implement deep transformative experiences. And also, I would think integration is probably not the first thing they think about, because I think most of the focus is given to before the experience, and it's part of the sales and marketing process where the interactions with the clients or with the guests is really about making sure that people convert to paying for the experience or upgrading or upselling or whatever. And I'm talking from with business language that's clashing actually when I'm mentioning those words, but a lot of focus is there. And then there's a lot of focus on wow factors of experiences so that people are, wow, like that really worked. And I would think that one, it's rare to see deep transformation. And two, it's probably even rarer for people to think about the transformation on the longer term, on the integration side. Either one more thing on the list and they need to focus somewhere. And then two, it's very expensive because you need to do personal long-term engagement for it to be working properly. So how do you navigate and how do you help people with those questions, and how do you get them interested in the integration when they might be focusing on other aspects?
You bring up a lot of good points, and it's interesting because we are so focused on that preparation and the experience itself, yet how do we retain a customer for life, so to speak? It's when they keep coming back. It's when they're inspired and transformed that they come back and they want to do more and they want to engage more with a particular brand or experience. And of course, they tell their friends and their family and they come as well. And so it is part, of course, the point of it all is to help the individual continue to grow and to work on themselves and to give them the right tools so that they can go and do that on their own. But it's also so that they can return and they can deepen. Oftentimes we might think that we're going back and doing the same thing over again, when in fact we're not, because our psyche, our bodies, our emotional states, we're more primed to go through these experiences on a deeper level since we've experienced it before. We feel safe in it already. So we can cut through the BS at the beginning and go even deeper. Even if it might look like it's a repetition, it's never a repetition, it's a deepening. And what I feel is really interesting with integration that hospitality can consider is leveraging community. It's leveraging the others that are in the experience with you. We don't integrate alone. In tribal indigenous societies that work with transformational states and with plant medicines, they live in community. Their indigenous spiritual leader is in community with them. And there is no real such thing as integration for them because their life is frankly an integration and they're embedded in nature and with others. And so how do we relate to that for our own lives? It's with the people that we're with, whether it's those individuals that went on that journey with us or enlisting the support of the people in our immediate circle. And that can be outsourced, so to speak. There is community accountability there. And that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money or resources because it's really embedding it into the day-to-day fabric of how we're living. It's just making it less about work. I feel that integration can sometimes feel like a lot of work, and it's true. It requires discipline. It requires consistency and practice. But if we make it just another part of our life, it won't feel so much like a burden for us.
Love it. We spoke about two principles. One was service, and then you went back to rest and just not do so much, because that was actually my question would be like, what action? And like, no action, just rest there. What is the best way to integrate any kind of transformation? Would you say that every experience is totally different and the integration is to be different? Or would you say that there are some key aspects that you need to look at for this to be proper?
Integration, a key aspect of integration is rooted in that seed of intention. So that's where preparation is important. And often in an experience, wherever you are, there are exercises or facilitators that talk about setting an intention. What is it that you hope to get out of this experience? And integration is about going back to that intention, having a deeper look at it, refining it, and creating action steps so that intention can be either released, perhaps it doesn't serve us anymore, perhaps that intention should actually be strengthened. So what are the ways that we can do that? Or maybe we realize that there's something completely different that we need to start embedding into our daily life. So we use the intention as the anchor point, and then we take steps there. And depending on our personal characteristics and who we are and how we move through space, perhaps we are more keen on writing, and this is the way we process information, is through the practice of writing and navigating our experiences through this. So I would highly recommend journaling about what's going on. Physically writing on paper is always more effective than, let's say, typing it in your phone or on your computer. And that's a really nice way to also look back over time and see what's changed, what's come up, where can you go deeper? What is it that is still a challenge for you? What do you need support in? So there is this element of there is no one right way to integrate. However, it starts with the intention, and then the practice is, it's like the spoke, the wheel with the different spokes, they come out from there. Some of us might be more inclined to doing body work or massage or dance, working more with the body in order to feel what's happening and what's moving through us. And it's actually less effective for us to be working through the mind at this stage. So there are different practices that cater to different personalities and interests.
One of the ways I've been playing with was the experience that would be already integrated. So you live it. For instance, we were talking about peak experiences. Let's say you spend a few days or a few hours in a very intense journey, and then you integrate it later on. How do you see this in terms of long-term impact versus an integration that is already happening throughout the experience, which is, if we were to think about ordinary life, let's say you work, you do your logistics, and then you do your inner work, having a retreat where you would have maybe a little bit more of inner work, but you still maintain your creative flow and you still manage some level of logistics so that you're not completely out of your personal context. You're not just taught one thing and then you go and you're like, how do I integrate this? So how do you see it?
You seem to be describing like an integrating the integration of, it's meta. I like it. I feel that's a really beautiful way of transitioning out of any kind of transformative moment. It can be a transition, or as you say, it's actually integrated in the experience itself, where we're already experiencing what it would be like to be back in our ordinary state. Like you say, the logistics are there. Maybe we're taking phone calls. Maybe we're still working part of the time. There are different schools of thought around this, right? Some people might say it's impossible because you need fully to switch off so you can have that psychological, physical, and emotional safety in order to allow that experience to really envelop you. And in the process of forgetting everything from the outside, you're keeping a very full, open mind and open heart for what might come in. And that's typically what with many of these peak transformative experiences. However, if somebody is in the right intention, again, it goes back to intention, and they're taking this seriously, and they're not just half in, half out symbolically as well. They might be literally partially in, partially out, but they're not fully invested in what this is actually doing on a deeper level. And it might for them just be a surface physical rest, rejuvenation that touches a very surface level of the work, so to speak. But if they're willing to go there and to practice little by little what it is that they've learned in that other side, when they're maybe going back to work, taking that phone call, checking in with their spouse or their children, those micro practices of how is it that their tone of voice has changed? How is it that they're receiving this information? How can they practice in real time the challenges that are going to come up, and then have the safe space to go back to it if maybe they made a mistake or maybe they didn't do what they felt was the right thing to do. They actually have a safe container with people who are going through it too, and with a facilitator who they can relay that with and be like, oh, I messed this up again. I did it again. I went back into the hole like I always do. It's actually really beautiful to have people who are there for you on the other end of it to remind you that we are perfectly human. Mistakes happen. We're not just going to become magical enlightened beings after 4 days somewhere. It takes time. And so we're learning to have a lot of self-compassion in the process. So these are two schools of how things work. I would say both can work very effectively if it's done with the right intention and the right frameworks in place to make it happen.
Cool. So you mentioned the word frameworks, you spoke about school of thoughts. What are the most useful things you've come across in terms of integration throughout your journey and now your practice as an advisor?
I say that we are a culture that is still operating primarily from our minds when we're trying to make decisions and make changes. And so the practice of writing is very useful. I've seen it really help a lot of people. After you give that space for rest, having writing prompts that are dedicated to that particular experience where people can follow over the course of a few weeks, even if it's 5 minutes a day, that's already getting people into that reflective mood in a very quick and easy way. I find that to be really useful. I also find some kind of somatic exercise. It doesn't have to be very deep. It could be as simple as just 5-10 minutes of breathing, counting your breaths, following your breath in and out. And of course, if you're more experienced in that realm, you can go into more of a deeper meditation and followed by breath work, something that gets us to feel our bodies and remind us of the experience. I find music as well to be really interesting. In particular, if a piece of music is being played during an experience, to allow us to revisit that, either the exact same piece of music or in the same genre. It's when we're working with all of our senses, we're able to go back to the auditory sense and say, okay, I'm listening to this. It brings me right back to where I was. And it's a really interesting anchor. So if we equip people with the music, it brings back those memories. And there's no one right way to integrate. So these are frameworks. These are just little nuggets of ideas. And meet people where they are in their life. We don't want to force something on people where it really feels like just more work. Of course, discipline, responsibility. There is a responsibility. If we're committing to ourselves for X amount of days for a particular experience, we also need to embed that responsibility and commitment to what we'll do afterwards, and to give ourselves at least 30 days to do that. People say it takes at least 21 days to form new habits. We like 30 days. We like 3 to 4 weeks. That's a good number. If we can start with giving ourselves at least that amount of time, that's when we start to see changes happening.
And have you seen anyone specializing in integration like you did? I feel it's pretty rare, and it seems to be more of a modality focus. So someone would be more focused on breathwork or yoga, but just focusing on the integration, I think it's pretty rare. Are there psychologists that you read that are only looking at this, or people who have made this as their prime focus? Or are you a weird outlier?
It isn't common, I have to say. There's not a lot of people who are focusing on integration. But if you think about it, a lot of these modalities are forms of integration depending on their dose. So a breath work, if you do a holotropic breath work at a very high intensity, that is a peak experiences that can reach a very altered state. But if that same breath work instructor was supporting those people afterwards in a deep belly breathing exercise, that can become integration. Transcendental meditation to very simple meditation practices, ecstatic dance to a slow qigong type movement. There's different levels. And in terms of psychologists or coaches and guides, which are the people that I've been working with quite a lot and training them around integration, what they're doing already is supporting people after a process. It's done in their own frame of reference, whether it be psychotherapy or business coaching, life coaching. And this is just a nice complementary add-on so that they're informed of the different ways that people might be receiving or synthesizing these incredible insights. So it is a helpful tool for people to have this integration background, although just focusing on integration, that is not as common.
Have you been able to go all the way in your belief about integration with like partners or retreats and deliver exactly what you wanted or close to it? And what's the most extreme way of implementing your integration insights that you've gone through?
I've been able to go all the way.
So it's a dream, right? Yeah, for me,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about space a lot, and my dream, I'm not there yet. And so we always have to compromise because of partners or their own intentions are different, a little bit different from ours. And then there is also a financial or resource constraints. You have plenty of things that come into the equation. Well, yeah, if you were to think about how far you've been able to go so far, what comes to mind?
In the ideal world, I would revisit and see those same people again 6 months later, right? We'd all come together in the exact same container and have a real assessment and follow people through all this time to see how far they've come, what they're still working with, if they've maintained their practices or not, maybe even 3 months later. That's not as easy, especially because we all go off and we have our lives. And so as far as we're able to go is largely in the virtual realm, having circles online or Zoom sessions where we come after 3 months, for example, and we check in and we're really honest with ourselves. Have we been doing what we said we were doing? Has anything changed? Did we forget all about it and everything went back to normal? And we're human and things happen. And just having the ability to be able to bring people back to check in, even if it's virtual, it's a start. And it's what resources allow for most people. What I find the most interesting is when somebody comes back and brings a family member or somebody in their constellation that was their primary focus for integration, for mending the relationship or building that bridge again. And all of a sudden they get brought back into the process in a very real way to visit exactly the experience that they had, and they can work on it together. I feel that's one of the most interesting ways for that person to then also go through their own process.
How much of the clients that you work with are pure transformation versus more mainstream, maybe people that understand more or less what you do, but they're discovering it through you?
So most of my clients are pure transformation because this is a need that they have that requires immediate fulfillment. And I understand that what I do is quite niche. However, there are so many lessons to be learned in different ways that we can weave in what is done with integration for transformation for mainstream hospitality, for even gatherings or conferences, business conferences and events. I recently spoke at a conference in Portugal that was really a hybrid business conference, outdoor nature gathering. There was personal development workshops, there was movement, and there was the very traditional talks and keynotes. And that was a really interesting hybrid where for them, they didn't have the resources in place to have integration as part of it, right? So there was 600 people that you could see were experiencing some deep spontaneous and surprising transformation, even though they were at a business conference. And what came next was just the traditional checking in with people on LinkedIn, connecting, maybe posting about that experience, and leaving it up to the individual to connect with the people that they had met that they wanted to continue to do business with or conversations. And so I feel this is an incredible opportunity for these sort of experiences to meet those frameworks for integration from the more traditional transformational contexts. And that's largely through working peer-to-peer, having accountability groups, creating ways of reconnecting with one another, and in a hospitality context as well. So people go and they feel the sense of awe, they have these incredible emotions that they don't know how to describe when they're at this beautiful venue having a restful or inspiring moment. And then what do we do with that information? What happens? How can we enable the customer to feel inspired to come back or to tell others? And then that is part of also their own process too. And yeah, I welcome any opportunities where we can bring some of this philosophy into a more traditional context.
Yeah, for some reason, offsites are coming to mind, and all hands, any kind of business company events. And it's always it feels always that it's happening in a container, and everyone works so hard to prepare the content and everything, and you have this week, it's super strong. And during that week, emails build up in our inboxes, partners and customers are waiting. And so you go back to the next Monday and you go back and you need to work even harder on the core of the business. So all those insights, all those ideas, sometimes you can't revisit them for a week or two because pressure has built up. And yeah, to me, it's the way you think about it goes in the right direction. And yeah, beyond transformative experiences, or actually there are transformative experiences that are for the individual, so inner development. And then there are transformative experiences at the group level, which are the offsites and the leadership meetings. And it's interesting to see that the same problem happens, right? It's very little integrated. Maybe one question for you. By the way, I love what you said about taking bits and pieces of the experience and kind of microdose it afterwards, even if it's not psychedelics. So like if you have an incense during the retreat, give it as a takeaway package so that people can just reconnect with the smell. I loved it. What's your process when you advise or when you facilitate the integration process? And how deeply do you go into the experience building and the preparation design as well? Because I feel like you went very quickly to intention setting. And I guess that the facilitators would be thinking about it, but depending on how well they think about it, it sets you up for success in the integration step. So what's your process to work with facilitators?
The process certainly begins before the experience itself, if I can help it, if I have that sort of timeline available to me. It is really important to understand the intention of the facilitator, the intention of the experience, the intention of the business, why they're doing what they're doing, who it is that they care to serve, and the deeper purpose that they have as an organization. That starts with their intention. And that's typically where I start, because that also really trickles down to the ways in which that they're preparing their clients, the ways in which they make certain decisions in real time that can really affect the well-being of a client. Where are their priorities? These are all really important. And so my process begins at the beginning and always looking at how it is that they're welcoming their clients into the container, and not literally in the physical form, but whether it's the first email that they send out or the first phone call they have. What is the onboarding experience? What are the questions that they're asking to make sure that the person is prepared, if they're the right fit, all of these things. And then during the experience itself, whether I'm actually present, I'm often not present. It is making sure that they've set themselves up for having that intention be a firm, serious part of the conversation, of the experience itself. There is a gravity to having intention, and that there's the rules and sort of considerations in place, the ethical considerations as well that are there. There's a lot to look at. That's not just, okay, whatever's happened doesn't really matter, let's go for the integration. It actually begins at preparation. And in a way, it also is about screening the people themselves if they're ready, especially for very intense substance-induced experiences. Do they already have an integration practice that they can refer to when they're out of the experience itself? Are they already meditating? Are they already journaling? Are they already speaking to a therapist? And if they are, how do we bring that into their individual journey? And if they're not, how do we slowly add it in so it doesn't feel so strange and new after the fact? So the process truly begins before the experience itself.
Lovely. Have you theorized those things? Are you planning to write a book? Are you planning to share like a masterclass for facilitators? I understand you're working one-on-one with clients at the moment, you coach, you advise, but are you planning to theorize or come up with a formal way of teaching what you do?
So I have a method that I'm co-developing with a clinical psychologist here in Portugal. We've come together, we have very different backgrounds, but we really meet each other in a very special way where we share skill sets, but we also differ. She comes from that more clinical psychology, somatic body therapy, and I have a more theoretical neuroscience understanding. And also I bridge a lot of the wisdom traditions from the indigenous communities that I've worked with. And we've come together with a method that we're actually teaching at a retreat context. It's a hybrid training retreat for facilitators, guides, coaches, anyone who's in the area of holding space for others. They can learn about this way of integration and use that as a supplement and complement their own practice. And we hope to continue to do that and potentially bring it online as an online component. And I am writing a book. I'm in the process, an integration book. There will be a model, there will be guidelines. However, it is more of a sociocultural understanding of altered states and how integration is really the foundation of how we can look at this across different cultures and perspectives, and why it's so important, and how we can use integration in our own transformational journeys. So that will be coming out in the near future.
That's cool. Lovely. Yeah, I think you're onto something. To me, that's a question that obsessed me when I did my first long retreat. And I was super excited. I left the retreat feeling I was a change man. Then I was sustaining this thing maybe 1 or 2 days, and actually I was still with the people from the retreat, so it was easier. And then 3-4 days later, I'm like, oh God, I'm already back to my old ways, and it's been obsessing me. And I think we haven't talked about this, and the clock is ticking. But as the last thing, what do you think of intentional communities and building villages of people so that they can actually sustain this? Because the world and the systems that we live in are keeping us slaves to certain beliefs and attitudes and consumption habits that are making everything more difficult, right? I remember looking at my feet in a duty free, because I was coming back from India. That retreat was there. I was like, I don't want to be back in the world. I'm going to look at my feet and try to avoid all distractions and temptations. I remember doing this actually. And yeah, you can't fight the system all the time. You can be a soulman for a few hours a day, but when everyone calls you to the wrong things, and especially if you are in existing community, family, and friends who have different lifestyles, very hard for you to sustain this. So maybe to close on how you impact the bigger system, or how do you create villages? What's your view on this?
I believe we transform in relationship. We can only truly see how far we've come and where we've come and where we need to go in relationship to the outside. So as you say, in the same way that you saw how you were shying away from, or even trying to run away and hide from this outside world, it's because you could feel inside of you what was happening in that transformation. And what would it look like if we were in intentional communities that allowed you to safely unfold over time with patience, and with this continuous gentle push to continuing to work on yourself and develop those relationships in a more natural, organic way. And intentional communities and these kind of communities help us do that, because they're bringing us back to the more traditional ways of living, which is in relationships, and in a relationship that is collective, that has a shared value system, that supports one another. It's amazing what happens when we feel a fundamental safety to be ourselves. And these communities give us that safe container to do that work, instead of coming back to that harsh reality. It's not about escaping from the real world. It's not about creating a fantasy. There will still be challenges in these intentional communities. There still needs to be governance systems and ways of checks and balances. That's all natural, but it does replicate a more natural way of unfolding that we've lost, because we have been disconnected from these kind of societies. We have been disconnected from nature. And so these communities, I fundamentally believe, will help support in that process. I myself don't live in an intentional community. However, I am supported by a number of different communities in around the world that I can go to and I can retreat to if I need. And that's not always possible for people. But I do feel that there's a hope for creating these more structured containers for that safety that we all ultimately need in order to thrive.
Thank you. maybe just in case we missed anything regarding integration for long-term, sustaining long-term those beautiful vibes, let's call it. Anything that you wanted to share that you didn't share, or any key principle that we missed in our conversation?
I believe we covered many of the main points. Remembering reciprocity, remembering that there is a responsibility that we have when working in these experiences to also integrate them, and also to trust in your own intuition and your own medicine, where we seek a lot to externalize the solutions to our challenges, but when we really listen to what's going on within us, we have the answers, and to just remember that, to remember that medicine is within us, and we can take it from there with a lot more compassion to our experiencing.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You can find more about Amanda on her website, www.integra.guide, and, until the book is out, read her integration newsletter on Substack, integraguide.substack.com.